My name is Marlene. I am 76 years old. I have lived through things that would break most people in half. I buried my husband. I raised my son alone after that. I worked double shifts at a textile factory for 11 years straight, so Garrett could go to college. I ironed other people's clothes on weekends. I skipped meals so he would not have to skip his. I did all of that with my 2 hands and a back that has not stopped aching since I was 53. So when I tell you what happened to me last Tuesday inside the Kroger on Maplewood Avenue, I need you to understand who I am first. I need you to understand what kind of woman I am before you judge any decision I made that day. Because the woman standing in aisle 7 with a cart full of groceries and a declined card and a face burning, red in front of strangers, is not a woman who fell apart. She is a woman who had been pushed so far that something inside her finally clicked into place like a loaded lock. I woke up that Tuesday morning feeling decent. That is something at 76 years old. Decent is a gift. My knees were cooperating. The weather outside was cool, enough that my joints were not screaming at me the way they do in humidity. I made myself a cup of coffee with the good creamer, the vanilla kind. I keep hidden in the back of the refrigerator behind the orange juice because Savannah has a habit of using things that do not belong to her without asking. I sat at my kitchen table in the house I have owned for 31 years, and I drank my coffee slowly, and I watched the birds at the feeder outside my window, and I thought, today is going to be a good day, Marlene. I actually said that out loud to myself. Today is going to be a good day. I live alone. I want to be clear about that. I live alone in my own home on Birchwood Lane, and I have lived alone since. Garrett married Savannah 6 years ago and moved 11 minutes away into a house that I helped put the down payment on. $85,000 cash from my retirement savings. Because Garrett called me one afternoon and said, "Mom, the house is perfect, but we are $40,000 short," and I did not even hesitate. I did not say, "Let me think about it." I did not say, "What about my future?" I said, "How soon do you need it?" And he said, "This week," and I said, "Okay." Then he called back 2 days later and said, "Actually, we need 85 because of closing costs and fees," and I said, "Okay" again. I signed the paperwork and I handed it over, and I told myself that is what mothers do. That is what love looks like when it is real. Savannah said thank you once, in a text message. No period at the end of the sentence. Just "Thanks, Marlene!" exclamation point and a little house emoji. That was it. That was 6 years ago, and she has not mentioned it since. I am not telling you this so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this so you understand the full picture. So when we get to Kroger, and that card gets declined, you already know the foundation of what was sitting underneath that moment. So that Tuesday morning, I finished my coffee, and I made my list the way I always do. I write it by category. Produce first, then dairy, then meat, then dry goods, then frozen. I have done it that way for 40 years. I grabbed my purse, the brown leather one with the gold clasp that Harold gave me for our 20th anniversary. He has been gone 19 years now, and I still carry that purse because it is the finest thing I own and because it makes me feel like he is still close. And I drove myself to Kroger. I drove myself. At 76 years old, I still have my license and my faculties and my independence, and I intend to keep all 3 until the day God decides otherwise. The store was not too crowded at that hour. 10:15 in the morning on a Tuesday is a good time to shop. Mostly retirees and young mothers with strollers and a few people who clearly work night shifts and are just waking up. I like that crowd. Nobody is in a rush. Nobody sighs at you if you take an extra second reading a label. I took my cart and I started at the produce section the way I always do, and I worked my way through my list item by item. And I will tell you, it felt peaceful. It felt like a normal Tuesday. A good one, even. I spent probably 40 minutes in that store. I picked up the romaine lettuce and the cherry, tomatoes and the 2 avocados that were actually ripe for once. I got Garrett's favorite cereal because I was planning to drop some groceries at his house later that week the way I do sometimes. Just a little extra. Some things I know he likes, because I am his mother, and that is just what I do. I got Cooper's apple juice boxes. He is 8 years old, and he loves those little boxes. And I got Lily's yogurt pouches, because she is 5, and she will only eat that specific brand, and I memorized that without being asked, because that is the kind of grandmother I am. I had a full cart, a good cart, over $200 of groceries that I had planned carefully and chosen, with my family in mind even while shopping for myself. I got to the checkout and I put everything on the belt the way I always do, heavier items first so they bag properly, and the young cashier was pleasant enough. She had a nose, ring, and bright pink nails, and she scanned everything quickly and efficiently, and the total came up, and I opened my purse and I pulled out my Visa card. The one I have had for 9 years, the one that has never once been declined in 9 years. And I tapped it on the reader and I waited. Declined. I looked at the screen. I thought the machine made an error. I tapped again. Declined again. The cashier looked at me with that careful, neutral face that people use when they are trying not to embarrass you, and she said, "Would you like to try another card?" I said yes, of course, and I pulled out my MasterCard, the backup card, the one I keep for exactly these kinds of situations, even though these kinds of situations have not happened to me in 9 years. And I swiped that one. Declined. Both cards. Declined. I stood there and I felt the heat start at the back of my neck and move up over my ears and across my face. There were people behind me in line. A woman with a baby on her hip. A teenage boy with earbuds in. An older gentleman who was already sighing gently even though he was trying not to. I heard somebody shift their weight. I heard a cartwheel squeak. And I stood there in front of that register with my face on fire, and I said to the cashier, "I am so sorry. These cards have never done this before. Something must be wrong." And she said, "That is okay, ma'am. Take your time." And she was kind about it. She was genuinely kind, but kind did not fix what was happening. I stepped to the side. I let the people behind me go. I stood there next to my full cart of groceries, and I opened my purse, and I took out my phone and I called my bank. The number is saved in my phone. I have had the same bank for 22 years. The same branch. I know the branch manager by first name. Her name is Denise, and she sends me a birthday card every year without fail. The automated system picked up, and I pressed the right numbers, and I got to a representative, and I gave her my account information, and she pulled up my account. And there was a pause on the line. Not a long pause. Maybe 3 seconds. But I have lived long enough to know that a 3-second pause from a bank representative is never good news. She said, "Ms. Marlene, I see here that your cards were reported as lost or stolen this morning and were canceled at 9:47 a.m. I said, "I am sorry, what did you say?" She said, "Your Visa ending in 441-2 and your MasterCard ending in 7709 were both reported lost or stolen and canceled this morning at 9:47 a.m. I said I did not report them lost or stolen. She said the call came from the authorized account contact. I said I am the only authorized account contact on this account. There was another pause. Longer this time. She said, "Ms. Marlene, it looks like there is an authorized user on this account. Someone was added as an authorized user approximately 4 months ago. The cart full of groceries in front of me stopped mattering." The store noise faded. My knees were suddenly unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with my arthritis. I said who was added as an authorized user on my account. She said the name listed is Savannah. I did not scream. I am not a woman who screams. I have never in my life screamed in a public place, and I was not about to start. But something happened inside my chest in that moment that I do not have the right word for. It was not anger exactly. Anger is too simple a word. It was something older than anger, something that lives underneath anger in a deeper place, the place where you keep all the things you have absorbed quietly for years, and years without complaint because you loved someone and you believed they loved you back. I said to the representative, "I need those cards reinstated immediately." Both of them. She said, "I understand, Ms. Marlene, but because they were reported as lost or stolen, we will need to issue new cards, and those will arrive in 7 to 10 business days." I said I have $214 of groceries sitting in a cart in Kroger right now. She said, "I am so sorry for the inconvenience. And I understand this is very upsetting," and she meant it. I could hear it in her voice, but meaning it did not change the policy. I said, "Is there anything you can do today?" "Anything at all." She said the fastest option would be to visit your branch in person, and they may be able to issue a temporary solution. And she gave me the branch address even though I already knew it. I have been going there for 22 years. And she said, ask for a manager when you arrive and explain the situation. I thanked her. I hung up. I stood next to that cart for exactly 30 seconds, and I made a decision. I told the cashier, the sweet girl with the nose ring and the pink nails, I said, honey, I am so sorry, but I am going to have to leave this cart here. She looked at the cart and then at me, and she said, are you okay, ma'am? And I said, I am absolutely fine, thank you. And I picked up my purse and I walked out of Kroger without a single bag. I walked out of that store in a way I have never walked out of anywhere in my 76 years. I walked out leaving a full cart of groceries behind me. Groceries I had spent 40 minutes choosing, and I felt every single step from the bottom of my feet to the top of my skull. I sat in my car in the parking lot. I did not start the engine. I sat there and I breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way my doctor told me to when my blood pressure climbs. I breathed and I looked at the steering wheel and I let the full weight of what just happened settle over me like a cold fog. Savannah canceled my credit cards. Savannah, my son's wife. The woman who lives in a house I helped buy. The woman who eats the Christmas dinner I cook every year and accepts the birthday. Gifts I buy for her children, without ever once asking what I need or how I am doing or whether my knees are giving me trouble or whether the house feels empty on a Wednesday night in November. That woman called my bank at 9:47 in the morning while I was standing in the produce section, choosing avocados, and told them my cards were lost or stolen and had them canceled. I thought about why. I sat in that parking lot and I made myself think it through, clearly and calmly, because I am a woman who does not act before she thinks. I went back through the last several weeks looking for what I might have missed. Was there a conversation where something went wrong? Was there a moment? And then it came to me, not slowly, all at once, like a light going on in a dark room. 3 weeks ago, Garrett called me. He sounded stressed. He said, Mom, I need to talk to you about something. He said, Savannah and I have been looking at refinancing the house, and there is an opportunity to pull some equity out, and we want to use it to take the kids to Disney World and maybe upgrade the kitchen, and he said we were wondering if you would be willing to co-sign because your credit is better than ours and it would get us a better rate. He said it would only be for a short time. He said it was really important to Savannah. I said, Garrett, let me think about it. I did not say no. I did not say absolutely not. I said, let me think about it. And I did think about it. I thought about it for 3 days, and then I called Garrett back and I said, son, I love you, but I do not think co-signing a loan at 76 years old is something I am able to do responsibly. My credit is tied to my fixed income, my retirement. If something went wrong, I would have no way to recover. I said, I am sorry and I love you, and I said, please try to understand. Garrett said, okay, Mom, I get it. I thought we were fine. What I did not know, what I had no way of knowing while I sat in my car in the Kroger parking lot, breathing through my nose and out through my mouth, was that Savannah did not say okay. Savannah had a different response entirely, and that response started with adding herself to my bank account as an authorized user 4 months ago, and I still did not know how she managed that. And it ended with her picking up the phone at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning and canceling both of my credit cards, while I was 40 minutes away choosing avocados and Cooper's cereal and Lily's yogurt pouches. I'm going to tell you what I did next. But first, I need you to sit with that for a moment, because I think sometimes people hear a story like this and they rush to the action. They want to get to the revenge part. They want to see the confrontation. And I understand that, I do. But I want you to understand that between the parking lot and what happened next, there was a 76-year-old woman sitting alone in her car who had just discovered that the person her son chose to build a life with had reached into her financial life with both hands and squeezed. That is not nothing. That is not a small thing to absorb. That is a thing that changes something permanent inside you. A thing that moves a line you did not even know existed until it was crossed. I gave myself exactly 12 more minutes to breathe. Then I started the car and I drove to my bank branch on Sycamore Street. Denise was not at her desk when I walked in. Her assistant told me she was in a meeting, but the moment she heard my name, she came out. That is the kind of relationship you build over 22 years. She came out and she took one look at my face and she said, "Marlene, what happened?" And I told her all of it. The store, the declined cards, the phone call, the authorized user, the name. Denise sat across from me with her hands folded on the desk and she listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Let me pull this up right now." She looked at her screen and she looked at it for a long time. And then she looked at me and she said, "Marlene, I have to be honest with you." She said, "There are some things here that I need to walk you through carefully." She said approximately 4 months ago, a woman came into this branch with what appeared to be documentation authorizing her as a secondary account contact. She said the representative who processed it followed the correct procedure for the documentation presented. She said she is not able to tell me exactly what documentation was used without pulling the full record. But she said something feels not right about this, and she said she is going to escalate it immediately. I said, "Denise, I want to know how this happened. I want to know every detail of how my account was accessed by someone I did not authorize." Denise said, "I promise you, we are going to get to the bottom of this today." She said, "In the meantime, let me see what I can do to restore your access to your funds." She worked on it for 45 minutes. I sat in that chair and I did not look at my phone and I did not cry. I sat straight back the way my mother taught me and I waited. At the end of those 45 minutes, Denise came back with a temporary card and told me that my accounts were fully secured again and that the authorized user access had been removed and that the branch was filing an internal report and would be reaching out to me within 48 hours with a full account of what had happened. I thanked her. I stood up. I shook her hand. I walked out. I did not go back to Kroger. I drove home. I made myself a sandwich, sliced turkey on white bread with yellow mustard the way I always make it. I sat at my kitchen table and I ate it and I thought for a long time. And by the time I had finished that sandwich and washed my plate and set it back in the cabinet, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I want to be clear that what I decided to do was not about anger. It was not about revenge in the small petty sense. It was about something I had spent the better part of 6 years ignoring, and I was not willing to ignore it anymore. I was 76 years old and I was still standing and I still had my mind and my name and my credit score and my 31-year-old house on Birchwood Lane, and nobody was going to reach into my life and rearrange it without consequences. Not my daughter-in-law. Not anyone. The first call I made was to my attorney. His name is Philip, and I have known him for 15 years, and he is the kind of man who does not waste your time with unnecessary words. I told him what happened, and he was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. And then he said, "Marlene, I need you to come in tomorrow morning first thing and bring every document you have related to your financial accounts, any shared expenses with your son's household, any records of gifts or loans you have made to them, and anything else you think might be relevant." I said, "I will be there at 9. He said, "Good." He said, "Do not contact Savannah or Garrett tonight." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because I need to understand the full legal picture before any communication happens, and I need you to trust me on that." I said, "Philip, I have trusted you for 15 years. He said, "Good. See you at 9. I did not call Garrett that night. I want you to understand how hard that was. Garrett is my son, my only child. I was in labor with that boy for 17 hours, and when they placed him on my chest for the first time, I made him a silent promise that I would do anything for him. I have kept that promise every day of his life. Not calling him that night was one of the hardest things I have ever done, because every instinct I had was screaming at me to pick up the phone and say, "Garrett, what is happening in your house?" But Philip said wait, and Philip knows the law better than my instincts do, so I waited. I did some things that evening instead. Productive things. I went through my files, the big accordion folder I keep in the bottom drawer of my desk, the one Harold organized before he got sick, and that I have maintained ever since. I found the paperwork from the down payment on Garrett and Savannah's house. $85,000. I found the bank statement showing the transfer. I found the birthday cards. I had bought for both children over the past 6 years with the receipts. I save out of habit. I found the Christmas receipts. I found the records of the 2 times. I paid their electric bill when Garrett said they were running short. I found the documentation from the 1 time. I paid Lily's pediatric specialist appointment because they said insurance was fighting them on the claim. I made copies of everything. I put the originals back in the folder and I put the copies in a separate envelope. And I wrote Philip's name on the outside. I went to bed at 10:30. I slept better than I had in months. I do not know exactly why. Maybe because for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was doing something instead of absorbing something. I was at Philip's office at 9 on the dot. He had coffee waiting. We sat down and I told him the whole story from the beginning. Not just Tuesday, but the whole thing. The $85,000, the cosign request, the refusal, and then Tuesday. And I gave him my envelope. He went through everything methodically, and he asked me questions and I answered them, and at the end he leaned back in his chair and he looked at me and he said, "Marlene, what do you want the outcome to be here?" And I thought about that carefully before I answered. I said I want my name and my financial security protected completely and permanently. I said I want documentation of what Savannah did. And I said I want my son to know the truth about what happened in his own household. Philip nodded. He said I can help you with all 3 of those things. He said the unauthorized account access is potentially a serious matter, depending on what documentation. Savannah used to add herself to your account. He said if she used anything fraudulent, that is a different level of problem entirely. He said in the meantime he was going to send a formal letter to Garrett and Savannah outlining what had occurred and requesting an explanation and documentation of how the account access was obtained. He said it would come from his office on official letterhead and it would make very clear that this was not a family conversation, but a legal matter. I said send it. He said also, Marlene, and he paused here, he said the down payment. He said $85,000 is a significant sum, and depending on whether this was documented as a gift or a loan, that may or may not be relevant. I said it was a gift. He said I thought so. He said that does complicate things, but it does not change what happened on Tuesday. I said I understand. He said I will have the letter out by end of day. It went out that afternoon. Certified mail to Garrett and Savannah's. Address on Pinecrest Drive. Philip also sent me a copy by email and I read it twice. It was not aggressive. It was precise. It stated the facts. It stated that unauthorized access to my financial accounts had been obtained and used to cancel my credit cards. It stated that my client, myself, was requesting a full explanation within 7 business days. It stated that depending on the explanation received, further steps may be taken, including but not limited to referral to the appropriate authorities. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was the most powerful thing I had read in years. Garrett called me before he even finished reading it. His name lit up on my phone and I let it ring twice before I answered because I needed one more breath. Then I picked up. Mom? His voice was a sound I know better than any other sound on earth. I have heard it in every possible register. Happy and broken and young and older than it. Should have been at certain moments of his life. But that afternoon it was something I had never heard before. It was shaken. It was shaken, and underneath it there was something that might have been shame. He said, Mom, what is going on? I said, Garrett, I think you need to ask Savannah that question. There was silence on the line, long enough that I thought for a moment the call had dropped. Then he said, what do you mean? I said on Tuesday morning at 9:47, someone called my bank and reported my credit cards lost or stolen and had them both canceled. I was inside Kroger with $200 of groceries in my cart. I said, I assume you know who made that call. More silence. Then very quietly he said, Mom. I said, Garrett, I need you to understand that I am not calling you to fight. I said, I am calling you because you are my son and I love you and you deserve to hear this from me directly. I said what happened on Tuesday was not a small thing. I said it was not a misunderstanding or an accident. Someone deliberately reached into my financial life and disrupted it, and that person is authorized to live in a house that I made possible. I kept my voice very steady. I was proud of myself for that. He said I did not know, and I believed him. That is the thing about knowing someone for their whole life. You know when they are lying, and you know when they are telling the truth, and Garrett was telling the truth. He did not know. And underneath the relief of that, I felt the weight of what that meant for him. Because finding out something like this about your wife is not a small thing either. I understood that. I was not so consumed by my own pain that I could not understand his. I said, I know you did not know Garrett. I said, that is why I am telling you instead of just letting Philip handle everything. I said, but I need you to understand that I cannot pretend this did not happen. I cannot absorb this the way I have absorbed other things. I said, I am 76 years old and this is my life and my financial security. And I have worked too hard for too long for someone to reach in and grab at it because they are angry that I would not co-sign a loan. He said co-sign a loan. His voice changed. I said yes. I said Savannah did not take kindly to my decision not to co-sign. He was quiet for a very long time. I waited. Then he said, I need to make some calls, Mom. He said, can I come see you tomorrow? I said yes. I said, I will make coffee? He said, okay. He said, I love you. I said, I love you too, Garrett. Always. I did not sleep as well that second night. Not because I was angry, but because I was a mother. And being a mother means that even when you are completely in the right, you still feel the weight of how your rightness is going to land on your child. I lay in bed and I stared at the ceiling. And I thought about the 8-year-old version of Garrett, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, and I thought about all the versions of him between that little boy and the man who was going to knock on my door tomorrow morning, and I felt everything at once. That is the part they do not show you. The part where being right does not mean not hurting. Garrett came at 10 the next morning. He looked like he had not slept. His hair was not properly combed, and his shirt was wrinkled, and he had that specific look around the eyes that I recognize from every hard time he has ever been through. He sat down at my kitchen table, and I put coffee in front of him, and I sat across from him, and neither of us said anything for a full minute. Then he said, Mom, she told me she did it for us. I said, I know. He said, she said you were being selfish with the loan and that she was just trying to teach you a lesson. I felt something move through me when he said that. Something cold and clear. But I did not interrupt. He said she only meant for it to be temporary. That she was going to call the bank back and say she found the cards. That she just wanted to scare you a little. To make you realize what it felt like to not have access to things. He shook his head slowly. He said, she told me this like it was reasonable. Mom. She sat across from me last night and explained this to me like it made sense. I said, Garrett. He looked at me. I said, there is no version of that plan that is acceptable. I said, frightening a 76-year-old woman as a lesson is not love for your family. I said, accessing my bank account without my knowledge and using that access to cut off my credit cards while I am standing in a grocery store is not a lesson. I said, you need to understand what this actually is. He said, I know, Mom. He said, I know. And he put his face in his hands and he sat there for a moment and I let him. I did not try to fix it. Sometimes you have to let someone feel the full weight of what they are looking at. When he lifted his head, his eyes were red. He said, what happens now? I said, that depends on some things. I said, Philip is still looking into how Savannah was added to my account in the first place. I said, depending on what documentation was used, that could be a significantly more serious situation than what we have talked about already. He went still. He said, what do you mean? I said, I mean, if Savannah presented documentation that was not accurate in order to be added to my account, that is not just a family problem, Garrett. He understood. I watched him understand it, and I watched what that cost him, and I did not look away because I thought he needed me to be there. For all of it, not just the easy parts. He said, what do you need from me, Mom? I said, I need you to understand that I love you completely and none of that changes. I said, I also need you to understand that I will not be co-signing anything. I said, I will not be absorbing this incident without full accountability. I said, I still intend to be your mother in every way that I know how to be your mother. I said, but I am also going to protect myself, because if I do not, nobody will. He nodded. He held his coffee cup with both hands and he nodded slowly. Then he said she has to call the bank and tell them the truth. About the cards. About why she called. I said yes. He said she needs to do that today. I said yes. He said I will make sure of it. I believed him. He stayed for an hour. We did not talk about Savannah the whole time. We talked about Cooper and the baseball team he just joined and how he can already throw a fastball that surprises people, and we talked about Lily and the drawing she made at school last week of our whole family that apparently included me, standing in my garden, holding an enormous sunflower, and Garrett had a picture of it on his phone and he showed it to me. That little girl drew me holding a sunflower. I looked at that drawing for a long time. I thought about Lily in that house with all of this happening around her. I thought about Cooper, and I knew that whatever happened between me and Savannah and whatever Philip uncovered and whatever decisions got made, those two children were going to remain in my life completely. That was not negotiable. Garrett left and I went back to my files. I am a thorough woman. I have always been a thorough woman. Harold used to say, Marlene, you are the most organized human being on the planet, and I used to laugh at him for it, but right now I am grateful for that quality in myself. I went through everything again. I thought about the timeline. 4 months ago, Savannah went to the bank. That was not a spontaneous decision. That was planned. That means for 4 months she has had access to my account information, and she waited for the right moment to use it. The right moment turned out to be immediately after I declined to co-sign the loan. The question I kept sitting with was what else? If she had that access for 4 months, what else did she know? What else did she see? I called Denise again and I asked her that directly. Denise said she could not share specific details over the phone, but she said the internal review was moving quickly and that I would have a full picture within 48 hours. I said, Denise, I need to know if anything was moved or accessed or altered beyond the card cancellation. She said, Marlene, I can tell you right now that your account balances are exactly what they should be. I said, thank you. I said, please keep going. While I waited, I did some other things. I called my doctor and I scheduled my regular quarterly check because stress at my age is a physical thing, not just an emotional one, and I was not going to let any of this get into my body without addressing it. I called my neighbor, Patricia, who is 81 years old and one of the sharpest women I know, and I told her enough of the story that she understood what was happening, and she said, Marlene, you handled that? Exactly right. And she said, if you need anything, call me day or night. I called my friend Gloria from my church, who is a retired social worker, and she listened and said exactly what I needed to hear, which was you did not cause this and you are not responsible for managing everyone else's feelings about the truth. I wrote those words down on a notepad and I put it on my kitchen counter where I could see it. The 48 hours passed. Denise called me on Thursday afternoon. She had the full picture. What she told me made me sit down in the nearest chair. Savannah had come into the branch 4 months ago with a document. The document appeared to be a power of attorney authorizing her to manage my financial affairs. Denise said the document had my signature on it. I said, Denise, I did not sign any document. She said, I know Marlene. She said she is sending everything to the fraud department today, and she said she needs me to come in and provide a formal statement, confirming that the signature is not mine. I said I will be there first thing in the morning. She said, Marlene, I want you to know that we take this very seriously. I said, I know you do, Denise. I said, I have known you for 22 years. She said, yes, you have. I called Philip immediately after. I told him what Denise said. He was quiet for one moment. Then he said, Marlene, I need you to understand what we are potentially dealing with here. He said, document fraud involving a financial institution is a federal matter. I said, I understand. He said, do you want to proceed? I said, Philip, what are my other options? He said you could choose not to. Pursue the fraud angle and handle this as a strictly civil family matter. I said, meaning what? He said, meaning a formal demand letter, a repayment agreement for the $85,000 if you choose to recharacterize The gift is a loan, financial separation from any shared accounts, potentially a formal legal agreement about boundaries going forward. I said, and if I pursue the fraud matter? He said then the bank reports it, there is an investigation, and Savannah faces the possibility of serious criminal charges. I said, what do you recommend? He said that is not his call to make. He said it is entirely mine. I sat with that for 3 days. 3 full days. I did not call Garrett. I did not call Savannah. I sat in my house on Birchwood. Lane and I thought about my son, and I thought about Cooper. And Lily and I thought about... Savannah and I tried to think about her as clearly and fairly as I possibly could. I tried to remove my own pain from the calculation and look at her as a whole person. She is 34 years old. She grew up in a house where I know money was always tight because Garrett has told me things over the years about her childhood. She married a man she loves, and she is trying to build a life, and she is scared, and when she gets scared, she does things she should not do. I know that about her. I have known it for years, and I have watched Garrett manage it and make space for it because he loves her. None of that excuses what she did. Understanding a person does not mean accepting what they do to you. But it mattered to my decision. On the 3rd day, I called Garrett. I said I need to meet with you and Savannah together. He said, okay. He said, when? I said, Saturday morning. He said, we will be there. They came at 11. Savannah looked like she had been crying for several days. She looked small in a way I had not seen before. She sat down at my kitchen table where I have fed her Christmas dinner and birthday cake and ordinary Tuesday sandwiches, and she could not look me in the eye. Garrett sat next to her. He was holding her hand, but his jaw was tight. I did not offer coffee this time. I sat down and I put my hands flat on the table and I looked at both of them. And I said, I am going to say some things and I need you both to let me finish before anyone speaks. They nodded. I said, Savannah, what you did on Tuesday was not a lesson. It was not a consequence. It was not you fighting for your family. I said what you did was reach into my life, without my knowledge, or my consent, and try to control me. I said I am 76 years old and I have been controlling my own life since before you were born. I said the part that has stayed with me the most is not the cards. I said the part that I cannot move past easily is that you had to fabricate a document to make it happen. That you went into a bank and you presented something with my name on it that I did not sign. I watched her face when I said that. She closed her eyes. I said, you understand what that is, Savannah. You understand that is a different category of thing than a disagreement or a bad decision. She said, yes. First word she had spoken. Very small. I said, I have spoken with my attorney and with the bank about all of it. I said the bank is conducting a formal review. I said there are decisions to be made about how this proceeds from a legal standpoint. I said I have not made those decisions yet. I said what I want you both to understand is that those decisions are mine to make. Not yours. Mine. And they will be based on what I believe is right, not on what is most comfortable for anyone. Garrett said, Mom. I said, let me finish. He said, yes, ma'am. He has not called me ma'am since he was 16 years old, and it meant something. I said, here is what I know for certain. I said I am not going to pretend this did not happen. I said I am not going to go back to the way things were before Tuesday, because the way things were before Tuesday included things that made Tuesday possible. I said I gave $85,000 to help build a life for this family, and I never asked for anything in return except to be treated with basic dignity. I said I have not always received that. I said this needs to change. I said not tomorrow, today. I looked at Savannah. I said I need to hear from you. In your own words. What you did and why. Not Garrett's version, yours. She looked up at me finally. Her eyes were swollen. She said, Marlene, I was wrong. She said, I knew you were going to say no to the loan and I was so angry. She said, I felt like you were choosing your own comfort over our family, and it made me feel like you did not care about us the way we needed you to. She said, I know that was wrong. She said, when I got added to the account 4 months ago, I told myself it was just in case. Just so I would know what was going on. She said, I told myself I would never actually do anything with it. She said, and then the loan happened and you said no, and she stopped. She said, I just wanted you to feel what it felt like to not have access to something you needed. There was silence. I said, Savannah. She looked at me. I said, I want to ask you one thing, and I need you to answer me honestly. I said, have you ever one time in 6 years thought about what I needed? Not what I could give your family, not what resources I had, or what I could provide or what would be helpful to your situation, but what I actually needed as a person, as your son's mother, as someone in your family. She did not answer right away. I gave her time. Then she said no, quietly, honestly, no, I have not. I nodded. I said, I appreciate that you told me the truth. I looked at both of them and I said, here is what is going to happen. I said, the bank investigation will continue and I am not going to interfere with that process. I said, whatever comes from that is a consequence of decisions that were made, and I cannot and will not protect you from the consequences of your decisions, Savannah. She nodded. She was holding Garrett's hand so hard her knuckles were white. I said, separately from the legal situation, I need some things from both of you. I said, I need a written acknowledgement from you both of the $85,000. Not because I am demanding repayment. I said because I need documentation that it happened. I said because at 76 years old, I need to know that my financial history is accurately recorded. They both agreed. I said I need my name completely removed from any future financial discussions or plans in your household unless I am the one who initiates that conversation. I said I will give what I choose to give when I choose to give it, and I will not be maneuvered or pressured or scared into any financial decision. They both agreed. I said, and I need a real relationship with my grandchildren to continue without disruption regardless of what happens between us adults. That is the non-negotiable one. Savannah said I would never keep Cooper and Lily from you. I said I know you believe that right now. I said I need you to mean it even when things are hard between us. She said I do mean it. Then I said something I had not planned to say. It came from somewhere quiet inside me. I said, Savannah, I know you did not have an easy start. I know you grew up in a house where money was frightening and scarce and where people held what they had tightly because they had to. I said I understand that some of what happened came from that place. I said I understand it, and I am not going to hold the origin of your fear against you. I said what I am holding you accountable for is what you chose to do with that fear. Because we always have a choice. At 34 years old with 2 children, you have to choose something better. She was crying fully now. Not dramatically, just quietly. The way people cry when they know they are in the wrong and there is nothing to argue about. Garrett looked at me across the table, and in his eyes, I saw the 8-year-old and the teenager and the young man and the father all at once. And I thought, Harold, I hope you can see this because our son is a good man even when things around him are hard, and you would be proud of that. They left 2 hours later. Garrett hugged me at the door for a long time. He said, thank you, Mom. I said, for what? He said, for not burning everything down. I said, Garrett, I never wanted to burn anything down. I said I just wanted to not be on fire anymore. The bank investigation is ongoing. I am not going to tell you how it ends because I do not know yet. What I know is that my cards work. My account is secured. My attorney is sharp. And I am a 76-year-old woman who walked out of a Kroger on a Tuesday morning with no groceries and more clarity than I have had in 6 years. I went back to that Kroger 2 days after everything. I got a new cart. I started in the produce section. I got the romaine and the cherry tomatoes and 2 perfectly ripe avocados. I got Garrett's cereal and Cooper's apple juice boxes and Lily's yogurt pouches. I paid with my reinstated card and I carried my bags to the car myself and I drove home in the afternoon light with the windows cracked, and I thought about Harold and about the birds at my feeder and about that sunflower drawing Lily made, where she put me right in the center of the family. I put the groceries away in my kitchen, every item in its place, and then I made myself a cup of coffee with the good vanilla creamer, and I sat at my table and I looked out at the garden and I thought, today was a good day, Marlene. I meant it more this time. If this story reached something in you, if it made you think about the women in your life who have quietly carried more than they should have had to carry. Drop a comment below and tell me where you are from. And if you love your grandmother, if you have one, or if you had one, or if she lives in your heart the way Harold lives in mine, please like this video and subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Never too late. Not at 76. Not ever.